Are we all set? All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Willie Recht. I'm the CEO of the Jewish Federation, and I just really wanted to thank the press and the media for joining us here today during this very critical time to help cover our press conference. Our original intent was to have a larger community gathering to coincide with this press conference, but due to the fact that Sacramento County is still in the red, and we take our responsibility for the health and safety of our community very seriously, we are doing this limited capacity press conference, again, which we are thankful to the press for being here and to our community on Zoom for joining us as well. It is now my pleasure to call up Bruce Palmer, President of the Jewish Federation of the Sacramento region.
Good afternoon. I'm Bruce Palmer, President of the Sacramento Jewish Federation. In the last several days, more than 3,600 missiles have been fired indiscriminately on Israeli communities by Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and other terrorist groups located in the Gaza. Approximately 1/3 of these missiles have landed in Gaza, killing and wounding the residents of the Gaza Strip. Innocent civilians, from infants to the elderly, from an immigrant Indian caregiver to an Arab and Jewish Israeli citizens, have been killed. This Israeli Defense Forces have responded by targeting terror infrastructure responsible for the attacks. We want to thank President Biden and the strong congressional majorities from both parties who have reiterated their strong and unqualified support for the right of Israel to self-defense. We also appreciate the Biden administration's vigorous and continuing effort to help the parties reach a ceasefire that will stop the violence and promote peaceful coexistence for all the people of the region. We also appreciate the strong international response supporting Israel's right to defend itself. The missiles raining down on Israel need to stop now and forever. As Hamas well knows, if it ceases firing missiles on Israel, Israel will suspend all defensive military action. We also want to make it clear that we abhor the civil unrest that has broken out in a number of Israeli cities. Both Arab and Jewish extremists are responsible for these attacks. They accomplish nothing but perpetuating hatred and fear. We are pleased that the leaders of every political party in Israel, from Prime Minister Netanyahu of Likud to Mansour Abbas of the United Arab List, have condemned the violence and demanded that it stop. And it is encouraging that in the last several days, Arab and Jewish citizens of Israel have taken to the streets to urge calm and an end to communal violence. We mourn the loss of all lives. As former Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir famously said, "The only alternative to war is peace, and the only road to peace is negotiations." Right now, peace may seem elusive, but our community believes that we must never give up on the quest for peace and reconciliation.
Thank you, Bruce. I would now like to welcome our special guest, Shlomi Kaufman, Consulate General to the State of Israel and to the Pacific Northwest. Thank you, Consulate General.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, friends. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support. On behalf of the State of Israel, I would like to express our heartfelt gratitude to the Jewish community in the Sacramento region for the expression of support and solidarity with the State of Israel. This is not obvious, and we're not taking it for granted. And we really, really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you to Jewish Federation of Sacramento, Congregation Beit Shalom, Hillel at UC Davis Sacramento, and Temple or Rishon. Your support during this time of crisis means so much to the people of Israel, who have spent the last 2 weeks in shelters and running to hide, subjected to thousands of rockets fired at their homes, schools, offices, and other civilian areas. We have also seen an outpouring support for Israel across the nation from people of all ideologies who stand in solidarity with Israelis, advocate for peace, and oppose terrorism and hatred. This has been a source of strength for Israelis who have spent the last 12 days constantly running into safe houses, bomb shelters, stairways, seeking shelters from rockets raining down on them. I just returned from Israel yesterday, where I witnessed firsthand these attacks. And I had to run with my 8-year-old mother down to hide from the bombs, from the rockets. It was a terrifying experience to find myself gathering with other neighbors, 30 people in one building in a shelter in the basement, or stopping my car to hide stopping my car to hide from rockets falling on us. That's real. And that's every day in the past 12 days. Make no mistake, this is what is called terrorism. This is how you terrorize people. And this is terrorism against civilians, Israelis and Palestinians alike. This is terrorism against peace and against hope. So long as the innocent Israeli civilians continue to be attacked by thousands of rockets launched into heavily populated areas, Israel will continue to exercise its fundamental right to defend itself against this terror, just as any other nation has the right to do. I cannot imagine any nation that would accept missiles firing on its capital or major population centers without responding to defend itself. As we speak, Israel has been a victim of more than 3,000 rockets attacks for no reason. The rockets launches are purposely located at schools, neighborhoods, apartment buildings, and other civilian areas in Gaza in order to use innocent Palestinians as human shields. 1/3 of these rockets misfire and land in Gaza, killing innocent civilians. Throughout this conflict, Israel has committed to preserving life and preventing collateral damage around innocent civilians as much as possible. Just yesterday, while Israeli civilians continue to be attacked by rockets, Israel has coordinated with the United Nations to deliver crucial humanitarian aid to Palestinians in Gaza. But Palestinian militant groups in Gaza attacked that UN convoy and prevented its delivery. Our goal is to restore security and peace to our citizens in the South and to make sure that Hamas and those who try to undermine the peaceful lives of our citizens will be deterred from pursuing this path in the future. We continue to draw strength from the support of our friends and communities across the United States. And I want to thank you again, the community of Sacramento, for standing with Israel and for your friendship. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Consul General. I would now like to introduce Rabbi Nancy Wexler from Congregation Beth Shalom.
Shalom. The fact that we're all here demonstrates our unwavering support for Israel. Shalom. It's a word. It's an aspiration, and it is more than a greeting. It is a commitment. Shalom means peace. It comes from the Hebrew word meaning wholeness. When there is shalom, we are whole. Where there is no shalom, we are incomplete. Shalom is humanity's responsibility. It is not a given. It is something we make. It is something we do. We say, Oseh Shalom, make peace. Shalom depends on a willingness from all sides to make the decision to find a way. I am here to shine a light for what is possible between Israelis and Palestinians, like a lighthouse whose function is dedicated to sending a steady beam for those lost at sea. That is how I view our presence here today. I am a member of the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom, a group of Jewish and Muslim women who meet each month for several years now to share our lives, our sacred texts, and to build trust based on our truest values. It would be easy to slip into thousands of years of blame, but because of a steel determination to forge a different path, we chose this one. The Sisterhood of Salam Shalom's mission is to unite against bigotry and acts of hate, one Muslim and one Jewish woman at a time. I pray with all my heart for a ceasefire. I condemn violence and will never give up on the aspiration for an inclusive shalom. My daughter is an Israeli citizen. She is in the military of the Israel Defense Forces. In my heart, support of the state of Israel is dependent on finding paths of coexistence. Mom, she said early this week, pray for the Palestinians as well as the Jews. Extremists are not prophets. The return to the path that the Creator designed will take absolute strength in order to stop and recognize that we are one family. Both sides must agree that without shalom, there is no life. Over 20 years ago, Moshe Ben Ari wrote a song that it has become an anthem associated with the highest goal for Jews and Muslims. It is particularly relevant now amid the violence, fear, and exposed wounds of trauma. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. Salam. Shalom. Peace, wholeness will yet come. Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi. I would now like to call up Simone Naftalin, President of the Board for Hillel at University of California, Davis in Sacramento. Thank you, Simone.
Hello, my name is Simone Naftalin, and I am the President of the Board of Directors for the Hillel at Davis and Sacramento. As the daughter of a Holocaust survivor, a proud Jew, and a proud supporter of the State of Israel, I stand by the words that have been expressed here this morning by the Federation, our rabbis, and the Consul General, who we appreciate for being here. For those who might not know, Hillel is the Center for Jewish Life on college campuses around the world. At UC Davis, anti-Semitic and anti-Israel sentiments and protests are commonplace and affect our Jewish and Israeli students in ways that no one should experience. Anti-Semitic flyers being distributed across campus, swastikas spray painted on Jewish fraternity houses, and being excluded from participating in events and on spaces on college campuses solely due to the fact that students are Jewish are just a few examples of the ways the Jewish students have been and are being marginalized on campus. We are fortunate that Chancellor May is willing to work with us to try to change this trajectory. Part of our mission at Hillel is to build a Jewish community on campus that will serve as an inspiration and model for what students can continue to contribute to their Jewish communities after their college experience. Israel, especially for the diaspora community, is a critical part to this model and inspiration. It's not just Sabbath dinners and Israeli movie nights that make up Hillel's purpose, though those are great. Hillel is here to represent and advocate for Jewish causes and concerns on campus and beyond. Tensions are incredibly high right now. Our hearts are with both our Israeli students whose families have spent the majority of last week hiding out in bomb shelters in Israel, as well as our Jewish and Israeli students who have been subject to targeting on social media here at home due to the false narratives that are being circulated. At a time when over 3,000 rockets have been fired into Israeli cities and communities, I could not think of a more important time or cause to advocate for on behalf of our Jewish students, our Israeli students, our wonderful Israeli fellow, Hillel family members, and all of the citizens of Israel. We pray for peace and their safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone. We'd now like to call up Rabbi Alan Ravachol from Temple Ori Shon.
My name is Rabbi Alan Ravachol from Temple Ori Shon in Orangevale, California. The medieval poet Yehuda Halevi writes, "My heart is in the east and I am in the depths of the west." His words are an expression of the unending Jewish attachment to Jerusalem and the land of Israel. For me, that attachment to the land and people of Israel is a part of my heart and soul. It is a part of my very being. Halevi's poem captures my sentiments at this very moment. I am standing here in complete support and solidarity with the land and people of Israel, Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, my people. I stand against Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. I stand with Israel as it aims to defeat its terrorist enemy. I'm here with a deep sense of concern and worry for the well-being of my brothers and sisters. Since the start of this war, Israel has endured thousands and thousands and thousands of missile attacks. Missiles aimed at its border with Gaza. Missiles that have been aimed on Ashdod, Ashkelon, Tel Aviv, and Haifa. Bombardments that have reached into central Israel and even Jerusalem. How ironic that Israel's missile defense system, Iron Dome, has even shot down missiles that have been fired from Gaza and would have otherwise landed in the West Bank. The effects of war are overwhelming. Even as I mourn the loss of Palestinian lives, the reality is that Israel, my people, has suffered human casualties. 1.3 million Israeli citizens have come under siege, and commerce has been paralyzed while citizens have been paralyzed while securing themselves in bomb shelters. There is no sovereign state in the world that would stand for this, and Israel will not either. Israel has every right to defend herself, especially when attacked by Hamas, a terrorist organization that clearly states in its charter, Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam has obliterated it, just as it has obliterated others before it. Those are the words of Hamas. It is hypocritical to believe that Israel should stand down against an enemy that seeks to obliterate it. I'm confident that if the United States was attacked with thousands of missiles by terrorists who sought to destroy it, we would marshal our armed forces and we would defeat the enemy quickly. Additionally, while Israel builds hospitals that have underground units to safely care for its patients during times of war, Hamas stores rockets under the Al-Shifa hospital, knowing that if Israel attacks its stockpile, it is also attacking a hospital. This is the way a terrorist organization operates. And to be clear, it is not a leadership that truly cares about its people. Now, here's the nuance. Standing against Hamas does not mean that I am against the Palestinian people. I have compassion for them. I mourn their losses. I want them to sleep at night. I want them to be free. I want them to control their own destiny. But sooner or later, they will need to look to their leadership to make their lives better and help them build a state that will focus on building a better life for its people, instead of using its resources to destroy the state of Israel. Standing against Hamas does not make me anti-Palestinian. It means that I care about the welfare and future of the Palestinian people. I look forward to peace. I pray for peace. I hope for peace. But I believe we must begin with the reality that the state of Israel exists and must be secure. I also begin with the reality that Israel has both the right and the responsibility to defend its citizens from any and all harm. So in this moment, I pray, as is taught us in the book of Psalms, may there be well-being within your ramparts, peace within your citadels. Rock of Israel, the one who has saved us and preserved us in life, bless the state of Israel, first flowering of our redemption. Be her loving shield and shelter of lasting peace. Guide her leaders and advisors by the light of truth. Instruct them with good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who build and protect the Holy Land. Deliver them from danger. Crown their efforts with success. Grant peace to the land, lasting joy to her people, and I will add to her neighbors as well. And together we say, Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi. I would now like to call up Don Gilbert, Vice President of the Board of Jewish Federation of the Sacramento region. After Don speaks, we're going to open it up to questions if there are some. So Don, thank you.
Thank you, Willie. As Willie said, I'm Don Gilbert and I'm Vice President of the Federation. Before we do take questions, I just wanted to give folks a little flavor, a little personal flavor of what some specific people in Israel are going through. My wife and I met at Tel Aviv University in 1982 on the overseas program, and we met two young Israelis at the time who eventually got married, Eli and Nurit, and they raised their kids in Ashkelon. They've raised their family in Ashkelon. Ashkelon is right near Gaza, and for the past 15 years, while they've raised their family, they've endured rocket attacks off and on, sometimes thousands, sometimes a few, but always. So what does Nurit do? Nurit is a social worker. She's employed by the city of Ashkelon. What is her job? One aspect of her job is to go to where rockets hit. Her job, if a rocket hits a school like it did yesterday, is to go to that school and to deal with the injured and those in shock, often children. In Israel, this is a job. This is a common job to have in Israel because Israel has been going through this for 15 years. I also want to talk about my niece, Ruthie Edelstein, who grew up here in Sacramento, and she lives in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv hasn't received as many missiles. It doesn't happen as often that they're attacked by rockets, although they're exposed all the time. So what has she been going through the last week? The last week, she lives in an old apartment building that doesn't have a bomb shelter. And the last week, she has spent many evenings under the stairwell in the hallway of her building because that's the only alternative she has, given that there's no bomb shelter there. And obviously, very trying time for her. Also, just want to point one other thing out about Ashkelon, which I forgot to mention, which is Ashkelon is a population of 140,000. 40,000 of those 140,000 don't have access to bomb shelters. That matters in Israel, unfortunately. Unlike here, it matters in Israel. And so those people do what my niece does. They run, take cover under a stairwell, and basically pray. So with that, we appreciate you being here, and we'd be happy to take any questions. No questions? Yes, sir.
I'll pose this one. Over the weekend, we saw hundreds of people protesting or rallying in the streets as part of what they call a Free Palestine movement. And I'm curious if you saw that, and we've seen a number of these kinds of events happening in cities around the world. And what's sort of your reaction to that and their message?
Well, I'm not sure what their message is. If it's just what Free Palestine means, you'd have to ask them. I can only tell you that as all of our speakers have said, Israel, and we feel the same way. We do not want any harm to come to any civilians on any side. As Rabbi Ravachol said, we would like the Palestinians to be able to achieve their aspirations, to control their own destiny. And we hope that someday the first step towards that control will be that they pick leaders who want to negotiate an equitable peace with Israel.
One other thing that I heard is the comparison to the Free Palestine movement with that of Black Lives Matter. So I'm curious if you can react to that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the, thanks for that question. That's an important question. I think it's very hard to compare to through the lens of the American civil rights movement and the Black Lives Matter movement, to take that and imprint that on the complex Middle East with thousands and thousands and thousands of years of history and the complex Arab-Israeli conflict. I know in the most superficial of lights that they seem similar, but they are much, much different, with much different origins. And lastly, I'd like to say something that's not understood by many about Israel. Israel's a Middle Eastern country. Eli and Norit, who I mentioned earlier, who live in Ashkelon, Norit's family lived for centuries in Iraq, and they were kicked out of Iraq by the Iraqi government in the 40s. Eli's family lived for centuries in Tunisia, and they were kicked out of Tunisia in the 40s by the government. And unfortunately, the world didn't recognize them as refugees, but thankfully Israel was there to receive them.
Don, thank you. Council General, thank you. Rabbis, thank you. Bruce, Simone. To our media and press, thank you so much for being here, taking the time out of your schedules. This is critical to get this message out, and we are grateful that you're here with us today. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.